As a church, we have 10 physical locations, 10 physical campuses that are mostly surrounding the immediate Louisville area. Next week, we'll start our 11th campus in Bullitt County on October 4th. We're excited about that. Excited to see what God is going to do there. But I know that right now we have a lot of people watching. In fact, thousands of you are watching this. We'll see this. And you don't necessarily live in and around this area. In fact, you live outside of Louisville, and maybe you don't know much about our city except for what you've seen in the last week or so. And you've seen images on the news, and you've heard stories about the unrest that we've been experiencing as a community. I want to thank so many of you who don't live around here, who have prayed for our church, our community. Thank you for the way you've expressed that support, the way you've let us know that you're standing with us, even though it's from a distance. What you may not know about our city is that we are considered to be around the fourth most segregated city in the United States. And it's important to understand how that came to pass. There's a lot of research you could do on this, but it's very deeply rooted in racism that, for the most part, was very overt 60 plus years ago through redlining and urban renewal and what we call here the 9th Street divide. But even though it was 60 plus years ago, we're still very segregated. In fact, I have an image that kind of captures the legacy of segregation in this community. The green dots represent our black citizens. The orange dots represent our white citizens. And so those decisions, many of them were made 60 plus years ago, but this is what we have. We have a very segregated city where 75% of our black population live west of 9th Street. They live in the west part of town. So 75% of our black population lives in 5% of Jefferson County is another way to think of it. And so much of how people tend to interpret anything and everything race-related has a lot to do with whether or not you're in the orange or in the green section and maybe where you came from, where you grew up. The challenge with segregation is many challenges, but one of the challenges with the legacy of segregation is it fools people into thinking that there is peace and harmony when in fact we've just separated people. And so one of the consequences of segregation is that it makes people think that there's a peace, but it's not real peace. It's a pseudo peace. Separating people can cover up a wound, but it doesn't heal a wound. Instead, the wound festers. And then there's a flashpoint and it's exposed. And we realize just how much hurt, how much pain there is. And we've been reminded of that. And we've seen it. We've felt the reality of our history this past week with the announcement concerning the death of Breonna Taylor. And we've just been reminded that our heart is healing and reconciliation and for God to redeem these things, but we have a long way to go and no one's sure what to do and everyone wants things to be different. So what's our response as followers of Jesus? Well, our call over the past week has been a call to prayer because we believe that prayer changes the world. And so our response should always be first to pray, but especially when we don't know what to do. We want to pray. And in our prayers, we want to grieve with those who grieve. We want to pray for justice and peace and protection and grace and truth. We want to pray for God to redeem and heal. We don't want to just pray away struggles, but we want to see God work in the midst of struggles. We want to see people drawn to Jesus because of and through the struggles. And so we want to pray. I want to tell you about this prayer meeting that took place on August 13th in 1727. It so happened that a large group of Christians from different denominations and different parts of what is now modern-day Germany were experiencing persecution because of their faith. And so they began to migrate towards this city called Herrnhut. And in the city, they established it so that they could have this freedom and they could be free from persecution. But the problem is all these Christians got together and they found out that they didn't get along with each other very well. Like they were very different in their beliefs and how they grew up and where they were from and socioeconomic, very different. So there was lots of conflict, lots of struggle, hard hearts, and it began to escalate in this city. And they decided they were going to have a town meeting in order to talk about these things, in order to try to deal with the conflict and the hard feelings. And again, they're all believers. They just aren't getting along. Hard to imagine, but apparently that happened at one time in history. And so they all gathered together. And sometimes, I suppose what can happen when you have a bunch of believers meet for a town meeting is it turns into a prayer meeting. And such is the case in Herrnhut. They began to pray, and they were led to humble themselves and to repent, and they agreed that they weren't going to try to figure out all their differences. They weren't going to go through the past and try and make sure everybody was even on everything. Instead, they decided that they were just going to gather to pray for unity. And that's what they did that night. And when they got done praying, a lady at the prayer meeting said, "What if we just keep praying?" Well, that sounded like a good idea. So they kept praying, and somebody put together a sign-up sheet. So they filled in the slots, and they prayed without ceasing, nonstop. Kept doing it. Just kept praying for their community, praying for the world, praying for unity. You know how long that prayer meeting lasted? Over 100 years. And if you study church history, you can find that revival spread throughout the world, and a lot of it can be traced to the Christians who prayed for 100 plus years in Herrnhut. And what they did is what we're going to do. We're going to pray without ceasing. We're going to pray around the clock. So for the next 18 days, starting tomorrow, we're going to just pray together for God's healing to come, for spiritual renewal and revival to spread across our community and across our land. We're going to pray 24/7 around the clock. We believe that prayer can change the world. And so we want to ask you to be a part of this. If you're watching this online, we'd love to include you in this. If you text the word pray to 733-733, we'll send you a link so that you can sign up and be a part of it. And we'll send you prayer prompts. You can also access this through the app or through the website. But this is what we want to commit ourselves to in this season. It's to being the branch and recognizing that we don't know what to do and we don't have what it takes. So we're going to stay connected to Jesus. We're going to stay connected to the vine because we know that we can find everything that we need in him. And that's what we've been studying in this series. We've been studying where Jesus talks to his followers in John 15, some of the last words he would speak before being crucified. And he gives them this metaphor as a way to help them always remember how he wants a relationship with him to work. And he says, "I am the vine, you are the branches." And he's getting ready to send them out to change the world. But he wants them to always remember how that's going to happen. It's going to happen not by their own strength, not by their own power or their creativity or their own ingenuity. It's going to happen through him. Jesus says, "I am the vine, you're the branch. Your job is to stay connected to me. I'm going to give you what you need to do what I've called you to do." And so here's the way we've studied it from John 15, verse 5. Jesus says, "I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit." Later on, he calls it fruit that will last. "But apart from me, you can't do anything." If we remain in him, we will bear much fruit. And in John 15, what we've seen is that Jesus has challenged his followers to bear three kinds of fruit, 14 and 15. Peace, joy, love. Peace, joy, and love. And then there's this abrupt shift that takes place in verse 18. We'll unpack it more next week, but after talking about love, 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 he gets to verse 18 and he says, hate, 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 hate. In fact, 7 times in 7 verses, he uses the word hate to describe what we can expect in this world. And that word hate is a personal rejection. It's personal conflict. And so as followers of Jesus, we are called to be the branch and bear fruit of peace and joy and love in a world that's full of hate, rejection, conflict, and division. We are to grow through the hate. We are to grow the fruit of the Spirit through the hate. So how do we do that? We do it by being the branch. by staying connected to Jesus. And so the fruit of the Spirit is love. And we grow love in a world of hate. The fruit of the Spirit is joy. We grow joy in a world of anger. The fruit of the Spirit is peace. We grow peace in a world of anxiety. The fruit of the Spirit is patience. We grow patience in a world that is easily annoyed and offended. The fruit of the Spirit is kindness, and so we grow the fruit of kindness in a world that can be cruel and harsh. This fruit of the Spirit is gentleness, and so we grow gentleness in a world that can be demanding and violent. We are to grow the fruit even in the midst of this conflict. And so Jesus challenges his followers with this, that even in a world full of hate, these are the things that you should see in your life. And so how do we do that? Well, we do it by being the branch, by doubling down on Jesus. And so I know we've talked about that. But what's it mean? Because these days it's easy to talk about certain things that you can post. Like it's easy to post but hard to practice. There's a lot of that kind of rhetoric these days. I've said this, I'll say it again, just to be clear. When we talk about being the branch, we talk about doubling down on Jesus. What we're not saying that politics aren't important. We're not saying that social structures don't matter. We're not saying that reform isn't needed. We're just saying that those things are very limited, and if we're going to produce fruit that will last, it's not going to get the job done. What we have to recognize is if we want reconciliation and reform, it's going to mean that hearts have been transformed, and Jesus is the only one who does that. If we want true reform, then it requires hearts being transformed, and Jesus is the one who does that. And so the rest of this sermon is going to be a little bit different. Again, instead of offering more rhetoric, because there's just so much of it, I want to tell you 3 stories of what it looks like to be the branch, what it looks like to double down on Jesus, to bear this fruit in a world that's full of conflict and division. I don't want to just give you more words to post. I want to give you a story to live. And so we're going to look at 3 stories, and stories are messier than rhetoric. Stories are nuanced. Stories have a way of challenging kind of the headline-driven narratives that we tell ourselves. But the Bible tells us the power of stories. The Bible says that one of the ways we overcome is by the word of our testimonies. It's by sharing stories of the difference that Jesus makes. Sharing a story that says only Jesus could do this. I've tried all these other things. It didn't work, but here's what Jesus has done. So I want to tell you 3 stories of what it looks like to be the branch, to grow fruit in the midst of hate. Story number 1. Story comes from the past, 1956. Martin Luther King Jr. was a 20-something-year-old Baptist preacher in Montgomery, Alabama. His life and his family had been threatened many times at this point. And one evening, he was at a rally not too far from his house where he was fighting against inequality. And a young man ran in at 9 o'clock, and around 9 o'clock and announced that Martin Luther King Jr.'s home was bombed, that it was on fire. So he runs out of the rally because his wife and his 2-month-old daughter are in that house, and he runs toward his house, and he can see the smoke. His house is burning, and by the time he gets there, there's already police there, and there's a large, angry crowd of black citizens who have baseball bats and weapons, and they are ready for revenge. And he checks on his wife and his daughter to make sure they're okay. And then he stands in front of his house that's on fire, and he begins to preach. What sermon do you preach when your house is on fire behind you? First 4 words of his sermon as he stood in front of this house. I want you to... Where's this going to go? And then he starts to quote the words of Jesus. I want you to love your enemies. Be good to them. Love them. Let them know you love them. What we are doing is right and just, and God is with us with love in our hearts and with faith and with God in front. We cannot lose. They began to sing Amazing Grace. They had their weapons, but he gave them a different weapon to fight with. So where does that kind of strength, that kind of grace come from? How do you bear that kind of fruit in the midst of that kind of hate? Where does that come from? It comes from the vine. And as followers of Jesus, this is how we are to change the world. The Bible tells us we don't wage war as the world wages war. Well, how does the world wage war? You know. You slap me, I'll slap you back. You raise your voice, I'll raise mine. You honk at me, I'll honk back at you. I'll start honking back at you before your honk's even finished honking. You comment at me, I'll comment back. You burn my house, I'll burn yours to the ground. And this is how the world wages war. The world wages war. The world yells, curses, mocks, hates. We pray, we bless, we serve, we love. That seems weak to you? Why don't you try it? Now, it doesn't mean Martin Luther King Jr. and others didn't wage war. Oh, they did. Waged war against injustice and inequality. Ultimately, he was killed by someone who hated him. He waged war, but he just didn't use the weapons of this world. As he said it, the eye for an eye approach is going to leave everyone blind. He put it this way: darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. Being the branch means that we stand in front of a house that's on fire and we preach, love your enemies. Story number 2. Like many of you, I have been praying. I've been fasting this week, praying that God would redeem, that he would bring good to our community. I've been asking God to protect against greater division and against deeper segregation. I've been praying and asking God to change things, to bring reconciliation and healing. I've been praying for Brianna's family. I've been praying for the safety of protesters. I've been praying for our officers. On Wednesday night, I got word that 2 of our officers had been shot. Thankfully, they're both expected to make a full recovery, but at the time I got word, I didn't know that, but I got his name, and I knew that he, along with his wife and kids, were part of our church family. His name's Gregory, and I immediately got on my knees and I prayed for him and I prayed for his wife as she received this news. And again, I was just really thankful that they're both going to be okay. But the next day, I Googled Gregory's name just to see what would come up as part of our church family. I just was trying to learn a little bit more about him. And when I Googled him, a story came up, and it was covered by CNN, ESPN, Fox News. In fact, there was a picture with the story of him that had gone viral and had been viewed millions of times. So here's that picture. It was taken at the end of a 6.2-mile race in Louisville that had 7,500 runners. And this brave lady here next to Officer Gregory, her name is Asia Ford. And at the time, she was in last place. But she had demonstrated just remarkable courage and strength to make it that far. She had been on a 2-year journey, had lost over 200 pounds. And she was desperate to finish this race. It was symbolic. She was doing it for herself and for her 3 kids. And she only had a mile left, but she was crying because her body just wouldn't let her take another step. And so she did what a branch does. She prayed and she asked God for strength. And she said, out of nowhere, Officer Gregory showed up. It turns out he had been following the back of the race, and she was the last runner, so he was following behind her, a little bit behind her in his car, and he saw her cry, and he saw her pray, and he got out of his car, and he took her by the arm, and he said, we're going to finish this together. And Officer Gregory said, just before she stepped over the finish line, I cut her loose so that she could finish on her own, and he said, my heart just swelled up. She crossed the finish line and put up her hands and hugged her son and friends, he said, and then came back to hug me. And he said how inspired he was by the way that Asia faced adversity with strength and courage. When asked about why he did it, Gregory explained, being a police officer is not just about law enforcement, it's about helping and serving. And he said, I am a Christ follower, and we're supposed to live our lives for others. I'm a branch. This is what branches do. And being the branch means that we come alongside people who are different than us, and we care and we serve, we love them, we help them cross the finish line. Can we put the picture back up of them? So after church this last hour, I got to find out a little bit more about what happened after this story. This young man's name is Terrence, and Terrence's principal came up to tell me a little bit more about what happened after this. He said, I don't know if you know this, he said, but after this, Officer Gregory continued to spend time with Terrence, and spend time with the family as he navigated his upcoming school year. It's what it looks like to be the branch. Story number 3. I want to introduce you to 2 of my friends, 2 members of our church family. First, I want to introduce you to Randy Stinnett. Randy was born and raised on a farm not far from here in Glasgow, Kentucky.
Tell me a little bit more about what things were like with your dad in your growing up years.
You know, I never really got to see him much. I would call him and he would say, yeah, I'm gonna come get you. I'll be there to get you Friday, you know. And then we had this big long driveway. It's like a half a mile gravel driveway, something like that, and an old front porch swing, you know. And I'd sit out there on that front porch swing with my bags packed, just swinging and waiting, watching for the dust cloud to come up, you know, on the road. And probably around midnight or 11 or something, you know, my mom would usually come out and, you know, make me come back in, you know.
Randy was still young, a teenager, when his dad and his older brother introduced him to the world of drugs. Randy managed to earn good grades, and he performed as an athlete. He was a Boy Scout. He was even offered a scholarship at a technical school. But his story shifted when he was caught with methamphetamine at school. In fact, for the next 12 years, he bounced in and out of prison. While in prison, Randy was invited to join a white supremacist gang at the North Point Training Center, a prison near Danville, Kentucky.
Back then, you used to be able to get home packages, which is where people send you like shoes and blankets from home and things like that. And I had gotten mine, and I was sitting unpacking it, you know, in my cell, or right in where my bunk was, and there was 3 black fellas that kind of circled me, you know, and they ended up taking my stuff.
Was there a fight?
Yeah, there was a fight. Yeah, but they won.
Mm-hmm. And that started to send you down a different path.
Yeah, I mean, after that, it's like, sign me up, man.
At 21 years old, Randy was running the prison gang. His reputation was one of being the most powerful and dangerous guys in the yard, but hatred was filling his heart. Do you get any tattoos in prison?
Yeah.
So do you have one that you can show me and talk about? I know it's a really personal question.
Yeah, I mean, I have one right here on my hand. Yeah. I wish I could, you know, I'm going to get rid of them, cover them up or something, but yeah, you know, it's...
But you know, brother.
Yeah.
Somebody else has scarred hands that took care of that already.
Yeah.
You know?
And how, I mean, you know, where my mindset was at that point in time in my life, when I got that tattoo right there, you know, I put that on there with the mindset of slapping people with it. I hated myself, man. I couldn't look in the mirror. I would go out on the yard and I had power and respect and people feared and hated and but when I'd go back in my cell, man, I couldn't look in the mirror, And it was Thanksgiving right around my birthday. I was on the phone with my daughter. And she's trying to be tough, she's asking tough questions. She asked me because her cousin's been giving her a hard time, telling her that, I would never get out of prison again. And so she's asking me some of those questions. And I could hear it in her voice. She's trying not to cry. And and I told her, I said, it's okay to cry. If you feel like crying, you ain't gotta be tough. You cry. And that's what she did. She sobbed. Till the phone cut off. You get 15 minutes, it cuts off. So, I hung up the phone and I went in my cell. I got down on my knees and I begged God not to kill me in prison. So give me one more chance, to be a father.
Let's just pause on Randy's story for a moment because I want to tell you another true story. I want to introduce you to another friend of mine, Dave Thomas. Dave was raised in a two-parent home. He was taught morals and values. He had good grades in school until he became a teenager and his best friend introduced him to drugs, to alcohol, and to gang violence.
Well, growing up, I grew up in a two-parent household. My dad did construction work, and so kind of like the boys, which was three of us, he taught us that trade with him, going out and work hard for your money, make a decent wage, and do what's right. I believe I was turning 15, and then we moved into the projects. And so once we moved into the projects, that's when my whole life started going in a whole totally different direction. Peer pressure began to really play a major part, and then it pressured me as I hanged around him. He was my peer, and then the pressure, I began to get involved, and I started selling drugs, and I started having the idea and the perception of a lot of the African and black people who was around me, my peers, that white people are the devil, and you got, it's white and blue-eyed devil. So that was kind of like a saying that people will always say, and especially if it was something that was racially motivated, that was taking place in the media or something, or if it was something where somebody felt like they was held back concerning with not getting a job opportunity, or something just deal with the government, or anything that it just felt like it was something that the opposite race was doing towards them or whatever. And so they would express that, and they were like, it's because of the white man, and the white man is the devil, and the blue-eyed white devil, and stuff like that. And so that started getting entwined in my belief, And so I would start to, express to some white people, not all, but whenever there was an encounter, or if I feel like I was being, it was something that was unjust, or something that I feel like that it should have went my way, or it should have happened in a different way, and if it was something where specifically concerning with me and a white person per se, or if the white person got promoted and I didn't, or the white person got the job and I didn't. So that's what would come out in my belief.
Dave dropped out of school in the 10th grade. For him, school could hardly compete with the drama and the cash from selling cocaine. By that point in his life, he was making more money on the streets than he could imagine making anywhere else. And it led him to being in and out of jail, and eventually it landed him at Green River Correctional Complex, where he learned about a white supremacist gang that he'd been warned to keep his distance from.
Once that happened in me, in the process of me still going to court and back and forth to court, I just said, God, whatever it is that they end up giving me with this time or whatever it takes or whatever takes place, it's all in your hands. I'm gonna give it to you. And so I ended up getting 15 years out of that charge. When I went to prison, I would just think, okay, Lord, basically the stuff that I didn't get caught for, I can just imagine if I got caught for this or I got caught for that, then it would have been way much more time. So I said, God, during this time, I'm just going to dedicate my whole life to you and get in your word and let your word get in me and transform my life. And then I was moved into another dorm to go into a program called the SAP program. So it was a substance abuse program. So that's where me and Randy met. It was more so of what I found out from other people that who Randy was and what he used to be involved with and what he did. So I was more of like, well, he may still be doing that. He may still be involved with that way of living and lifestyle. So
Dave watched Southeast worship services on television in prison, and once he was released, he came to Southeast. He signed up for Bible study, a small group and a weekend group. He began ministry in homeless shelters and with youth. And Dave was ordained by Southeast and sent out to help serve a church in West Louisville with Pastor Darrell Wilson at Greater New Beginnings Christian Church. And so now every day, Dave talks with people from all walks of life. People who are homeless, incarcerated, people who are doubting, people who are lost. One night in 2018 at a fundraiser for Prodigal Ministries, Randy told his story. He shared his testimony, and Dave Thomas was in the crowd.
I was very surprised. I didn't ever think I was gonna see Randy again, really. It was actually a testimony to God's grace and His mercy, and because when you're incarcerated and guys say that their life has been changed and transformed by the power of God, normally at times you say, okay, we'll see, right? So once I seen Randy out testifying to the goodness and mercy of God and sticking and staying in the race and letting God use him, it encouraged me a lot, more so than he probably even knew, to say, it was real. It was real. Mm-hmm.
Afterwards, David came up to me, and I hadn't seen him since we were on the yard together in prison. And we talked a little bit that night and shared about, how we got from where we were at to where we were standing now, and we exchanged numbers and, discussed maybe getting together in the future.
So when you called, do you remember what you said to him?
I think it was more of just, let's get together, seriously, and have lunch and talk about what's going on, what we can do, how we can get involved together. And I think we even was like, well, maybe we can go downtown and talk, together and affect somebody, show them where we come from and where we are now.
So, Dave, let me start a sentence, and you start it with the same words and then finish it, okay? As it relates to all this. And you can think about it. Like, you don't have to just pop it right out. Only Jesus.
Only Jesus can bring forth racial harmony. when we get to talking about the division and separation between cultures, black, white, Hispanic, Asian, Chinese, and what that looks like is a lot of people groups just doing what they do and how they do it, concerning with language, attitude, needs, and going in a direction in their life. But our God created all human beings, every tongue, every tribe, every nation, not to be divided, not to be separated, but to come into unity, to come into one mind and one accord. When I was lost and I was in darkness into the world, and was believing all the lies of the world, which was from the enemy, that white people are devils and white-eyed blue devil and all of that. But once my eyes was open to see and my ears to hear, now the Holy Spirit saying they just lost. They just lost, and it doesn't matter what culture they are, they just lost. And so just how I saved you, I want to save them and let them see how I see.
Yeah.
And then I'm letting you see the same way. And that's every tongue and every tribe and every nation.
Right.
And that's what Jesus does. He brings racial harmony when you surrender your life to him.
That's good.
Yeah, that's it. That's the answer you're looking for with the true total transformation of your mind, body. That's what takes it away. That's what will take it away.
When you see like the newspaper and it says, describes the two of you as brothers, is that how you feel?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't ask for a better brother. Yeah, for sure.
Is that how you feel, Dave?
Yes, for sure. We're definitely brothers in Christ, and skin complexion has nothing to do with that. It's all about the blood of Jesus.